Hello, and welcome to my take, and welcome to the third and final part in my Cornetto Trilogy series. If you'd like to catch up on the previous two videos in this series, then the links to which can be found either on your screen now or in the description box below. And thank you to anyone who's been patiently waiting for this video, as I know it's been a few weeks since part 2 of this series released. So without further ado, let's explore what made The World's End excellent. Now, there are a few main points which I'd like to cover in this video, and I always feel that this is the most overlooked of the three films in the trilogy. In fact, whilst I'd seen Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead for the first time many years ago, I saw this movie for the first time this year, and at first I didn't appreciate it as much as the other two. But actually, upon more rewatches, and through researching this film for this video, I've come to find out that this film has just as much to it as the other two, albeit in some slightly different ways. For starters, I would argue that out of the three films, it has the most character depth. Now, this isn't to say that either Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz lack this. Despite all three of these films being comedies, each have more heartfelt scenes in them, whether it be the death of Philip or Shaun's mum in Shaun of the Dead, or the fact that Nicholas Angel can't ever switch off from the job to the detriment of the rest of his life. There are deeper themes and emotions to be found veiled behind the comedy genre that these films fall into, and this is something that's been explained by Simon Pegg.
I also feel like Edgar and me are slightly misunderstood as being parodists, if there's such a word. But, you know, Shaun of the Dead was never supposed to be a parody of zombie films. We wanted to make a zombie film. We just happened to make it a comedy as well. We adore action films, and not being able to make an American action film because we're neither American nor particularly action-oriented as people, we had to make it in the UK, and it had to become a comedy so that we could do that, you know. And we didn't, in making The World's End, want to parody anything. We wanted to make a film. It is resolutely without any reference to any other film. What we thought we'd address if we were going to take on anything was the notion of British social science fiction, and not parody it, but take on those tropes, those ideas.
In The World's End, Simon Pegg's Gary King is perhaps the strongest blend of comedy and tragedy in a character that we see across the trilogy. When you watch the film for the first time, he starts off as moderately insufferable, in a way that neither Shaun or Nicholas Angel are. But as the film goes on, you start to get little cracks in that character's facade, suggesting to the viewer that there is more to him than what meets the eye, until you finally get the reveal at the end that he's a suicidal alcoholic. Really, this is quite genius in the way that this film is written, because when you look back on the first scene where we see the older Gary King, the fact that he's in a group therapy session is so obvious. But because at that stage we lack the context to know what's happening, we naturally assume otherwise. This mirrors how none of the other characters really figure out Gary until Nick Frost's Andy does near the end of the film. So, to create closeness between us and the rest of the cast, we're given the same level of information about Gary as what Gary provides them with. Now, this is a technique that I often seem to come across in writing. I've heard it explained to me before through a comparison between the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes films and the Benedict Cumberbatch series Sherlock. A key difference between these two interpretations in Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock's detection skills aren't something that you follow. He's an extravagant figure and more of an action hero in that version, who at the end reveals to you what he's deduced. Therefore, the film isn't framed from Sherlock's perspective, as we are never given a window into which we can connect with him. Whereas with Cumberbatch's Sherlock, whilst all of Sherlock's extravagances are certainly present, we follow the mystery alongside him. The plot follows Holmes conducting the investigation. Across the show, we get both monologues of what he's thinking and even words imposed onto the screen to show us his thought processes, as well as having scenes where we, the viewer, get to see the inside of his mind palace. The point I'm trying to make is that a character or a series of characters are easier to connect to if we feel like we're going on a journey with them. And in the case of this film, it's almost as if we, the audience, are invited on Gary's pub crawl too, as we learn more about him at the same pace as the rest of the characters. This is also why the opening of this film is so crucial too. Now, initially, I felt this scene goes on for far too long, but in actuality, it's perfect because it gives the viewer all the context we need to be on the same page as the rest of the characters. So, even though it's a very exposition heavy scene that relies on telling more than showing, which is generally a big no no in the world of screenwriting, it's actually the perfect setup for the film by placing the audience on the same level as the other characters. It's also a genius opening for another very clever reason, and this reason is a technique that director and writer Edgar Wright has relied upon in his previous films as well. Edgar has discussed before how the 1974 film Chinatown has influenced his work.
They say the famous thing, Robert McKee and Sid Field always go on about like the Chinatown script, saying that you have to set up the main premise of the film in the opening scene. And in Chinatown, they have that famous line at the start where they say, you've got to be rich to get away with murder. And of course, that becomes the theme of the film.
Edgar uses this technique in all three films in the Cornetto Trilogy. In Shaun of the Dead, the opening scene foreshadows the big life changes that'll end up coming with the zombie apocalypse, as well as foreshadowing the significance of the Winchester pub and Shaun's mum in the plot.
Shaun, what I'm trying to say is, I need something a little more than spending every night in the Winchester. I want to get out there and do more interesting stuff. I want to live a little. And I want you to want to do it too. Oh, listen to me. You're beginning to sound like your mum. Not that I know what she sounds like.
You still haven't met his mum? Not yet.
Don't you get along with your mum, Shaun?
No, it's not that I don't get on with her. Are you ashamed by your mum, Shaun? No, I love my mum. Yeah, I love his mum. Ed.
She's like butter.
Ed. Shaun, guys.
Shaun.
Liz. Look, I understand what you're trying to say, okay, and I agree. You should get out there. We'll start tomorrow. All right, I'll book a restaurant. The place does all the fish. Just the two of us. Things will change. Promise.
Really, Shaun?
In Hot Fuzz, the opening foreshadows Nicholas Angel's character arc of learning to become a team player, as well as the overarching plot of people disappearing in Sanford.
It's all about being a team player, Nicholas. You can't be the Sheriff of London.
If we let you carry on running around town, you'll continue to be exceptional, and we can't have that. You'll put us all out of a job.
With respect, sir, you can't just make people disappear.
Yes, I can. I'm the chief inspector.
In The World's End, the opening scene where Gary describes the original pub crawl from when they were young is an exact description of what happens to all of the characters this time around as well. All of these openings tie the film's plots up really neatly, because they tell you what the film is going to be about, all in the first few minutes. But it's only after rewatching, and maybe even rewatching multiple times, that you'll ever pick up on this detail. It's a detail that signifies excellent writing, because it means that the story is very well planned out from the moment that it starts. Thematically, this film is arguably the most interesting too, because it all boils down to the theme of a fear of replacement. Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg have explained how a lot of what influenced this film were their experiences of reading what's termed as social science fiction.
What we thought we'd address if we were going to take on anything was the notion of British social science fiction, and not parody it, but take on those tropes, those ideas.
The thing that we thought was like, it'd be great to do like a sort of sci-fi paranoia film, like more in the vein of like the Quatermass films, or Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or John Wyndham, or John Christopher. There's a really good strain of British sci-fi post-war social science fiction that's all of that kind of, political paranoia and xenophobia manifesting itself in science fiction films.
Social science fiction is a subgenre of science fiction. It's generally considered a softer form of the genre, as it usually is less reliant on space opera or technology, and more with speculation about society. So this would include books like H.G. Wells' The Time Machine from 1895, or Yevgeny Zamatin's We, or even Orwell's 1984. The latter two in particular stemmed from post-war fears around the spread of ideologies. If you think about it, The idea of replacement that the film uses can be applied to reality in the sense of political ideologies. Irrespective of where you sit on the political spectrum, it can be argued that both sides want everyone to conform to their worldview, which is in essence a very dangerous idea, because if no one ever challenges ideas in a society, that society's development is stunted and can in fact cause the society to devolve. The concept of gradual replacement feeds into this because after the Second World War and the beginning of the Cold War, a lot of attention was drawn to the spread of ideologies in places such as Germany when it was under Nazi rule, or the Soviet Union under Stalin's communism. These ideologies relied on their society's collective agreement with them, with no toleration for dissent, and it's why in Nazi Germany in particular, Hitler and his propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels focused very heavily on doctoring the education materials for schools, as they understood that the children were the future. If they controlled how the children thought through miseducation, then they could ensure stability under Nazi rule, and no one would challenge that establishment. So to create a society of conformity, this takes time, and success is determined by ensuring that future generations are progressively more conformist to ideas than the previous generation. So linking this back to the network in this movie, it's attempting a form of conformity through gradual replacement of the population of Newton Haven, removing and replacing anyone who does not conform with the network with clones of the original residents. It's a form of homogenizing control, which is represented in the film through the network. And what's interesting about this is that the network doesn't replace the exteriors of those it replicates, only the interiors, and therefore by definition it takes away their souls and their minds. Perhaps this is going a bit far now, but maybe that's why the heads are shown as hollow, because effectively the network's replicants of citizens are of a hive mind rather than of individual thought, hence the lack of a brain or computer system inside the heads of the replicants, as a way of symbolizing this. These ideas of homogenization are also explored in relation to the term starbucking, which is used in the film.
I don't remember this at all. Has it been refurbished?
Been bought by a chain on it.
Part of that nationwide initiative to rob small, charming pubs of any discernible character.
Starbucking, man. It's happening everywhere.
Simon Pegg has explained this idea as referencing the way that Western society is slowly drifting away from individual businesses and towards bigger chains and franchises. That's effectively what the network are. This theme of homogenization runs deeply into the film's set design as well, because the logo for the network can be found all over the film. It's on all the bins, it's on all the school uniform, it's on the sign to Newton Haven, it's even on all the beer pumps in the film. It's everywhere. And the reason it's everywhere is because the network seeks to homogenize everything. Even the majority of the cars seen in the Newton Haven car parks are all the same. Most of them are Vauxhall Amperas, again showing this conformity and homogeneity. And also, a Vauxhall Ampera is an electric car as well, which is a subtle allusion to the robots as they are electric. The only other two cars that have any attention in the film are Gary's original Ford Granada and Sam's Ford Fiesta. And the reason for that is that neither car has been present in Newton Haven as the network has taken over, and therefore their cars reflect the fact that their characters haven't been there and haven't been taken over either. This idea of replacement ties in really neatly with the film's other theme, this being the fear of aging and the midlife crisis, because effectively, these concepts go hand in hand. As you get older, the next generation come up to replace you. The cycle repeats, and it's easy for that to be quite an overwhelming concept, because many people, while they're young, feel that the world is theirs. But as they age and the world continues to grow and change with them, some can find that their place in the world feels less significant than they thought, as they begin to realize that we are all just small parts in an extraordinary chain of human life. The temptation, then, is to look back to the past for some sense of comfort, but the danger is staying there too long, because you stop moving forward in life, and in a way, you stop living. And that's exactly what Gary King is, because for him,
It never got better than that night.
and because he never moved forward, because he never moved on. He ended up trapped in a past that no longer exists, and that led him to the state he's in by the time that this film starts. Simon Pegg, who not only plays Gary, but also co-wrote the script with Edgar Wright, has talked a bit about Gary's outfit in relation to this idea.
Edgar and I had this idea that the reason Gary dresses the same way is that it might not necessarily be that he's dressed like that for the whole 20 years, but he's dressed like this for that night. It's like when you see an American military officer commit suicide, you know, they put all their clothes on, they put all their medals on and their white gloves, and then they put a gun to their head. That's essentially what Gary is doing in this film. You know, you don't learn that until the end, that he's literally got nothing left.
When we view Gary with this in mind, this pub crawl is his last attempt at living. He wants to end his life just a little further than the point he felt it stopped at. And it was that night when they were young. That was the last time he felt truly alive. Simon Pegg has stated before that Gary is his favourite of all the characters he's played, because there's just so much depth to him when you really explore him as a character. Despite the fact that this movie is a comedy, this movie also hides some very deep concepts about life and emotions, and much in the same way that the film's genre hides deeper meaning. The same is true of Gary, because his outgoing, energetic, childish mannerisms and behaviour are all a cover for what's really going on inside the man underneath it all. Now, I think where a lot of other people would stop would be talking about this with Gary and then just say that he contrasts the other characters who have all moved on. But this isn't necessarily true when you really analyse this film, because whilst on the surface they've all outgrown Gary, they are all still susceptible to his manipulation in the same way that they were when they were younger. To get them to go on the pub crawl, Gary uses the same tactics he did when he was younger. He bullies Peter.
Vanessa? No, your wife.
Vanessa.
Yeah, how's she? She's good. Huh? Have you had sex yet? We have 2 children. Ooh, twice. Get you, fuck machine!
He flatters Oliver. He challenges Stephen. And he emotionally blackmailed Andy.
Oh, I thought you should know.
What?
Mum died
When?
a couple of weeks ago. The big cancer.
I'm sorry.
She just always really liked you, you know. Got me thinking about the old days, particularly that night, you know, because we were so happy. And, you know, I love the boys like brothers, but when all's said and done, you're the best friend I ever had. It's good to see you, mate.
In this regard, then, even though they all escaped Newton Haven, we have to ask whether they actually did really move on. Yes, now some went off and had families, wives, and careers, but they never really evolved as people. Because if they did, they'd see through Gary's manipulation. But they don't, because clearly they're still attached to the past versions of themselves. This, then, really asks questions about whether or not we do change in life, or whether we fundamentally stay the same in terms of our character. The end of the film, after the world ends, only raises this question even more so, because Gary especially ends up having a new life doing exactly what he wanted to in adolescence, which was to have a team around him and have fun being the leader of the group. The team at the end is different, admittedly, but essentially his fundamental desires, what he wanted his life to be, are the same. We have to ask whether or not Gary ever really changes as a character. And if not, is this film's message that you should never try and recreate the past? You should carry your lifelong desires with you and make them in new ways in the future, because that's essentially what Gary does in this film. Another little detail that's worth mentioning is the hierarchy that's created through the characters' names. Gary King is the king of the group. His second in command is Andy Knightley, who, you guessed it, is like a knight. Andy is combat ready and wants to save Gary. Stephen Prince is the next one down in the hierarchy. Below that you have Oliver Chamberlain, and below that again you have Peter Page. Whilst admittedly the Prince is above the Knight in a traditional royal hierarchy, aside from that, all the other characters fall under Gary King. And one can argue that the way that he treats them mirrors the position that their name represents. He's the least respectful to Peter Page, because the page boy is the young male attendant or servant in a royal court, whereas the prince and the knight, so Stephen and Andy respectively, are treated with some more respect, and Gary, being the king, can do whatever the hell he wants because he's the boss, like a king. Now, switching gears quite dramatically, this film is not only a thematic marvel, but it's a technical marvel too, in terms of what the filmmaking practices involved in the production of this movie, particularly the film's reliance on practical effects wherever possible. I'm going to break this section down into sequences, which you'll see will be marked by this video's timestamps and chapters, beginning with some of the camera and practical effects techniques, and then going on to talk specifically about this film's fight sequences. Now, one of the key elements of this film's visuals is its use of lights and lighting. The robots, for instance, are shown to glow blue in the eyes and mouth at times. I naturally assumed that the majority of this would be CGI. However, I was curious to see if it was, considering how well the lighting in the environment around them looks. That's often a telltale sign you can look for with bad CGI. The lighting of the environment around the CG effect won't always be accurately reflected how the CG effect would reflect light if it were done practically. Take the examples I'm showing on screen now, for instance. You can see that the lighting doesn't logically make sense for what's happening in the shot. But given how accurately the lighting matches the effect for this film, it's either great CGI or not CGI. And when I researched it, it proved not to be CGI and instead be a practical effect. So how did they do it? They basically built goggles and mouthpieces which projected blue light out of them to create the effect, therefore meaning that the lighting is accurately reflected because this actually happened for real in the shot. Now, on its own, this would look incredibly lame and low budget if you could see the goggles. So rather than using visual effects, it cleverly used a camera technique known as an anamorphic flare. Now, anamorphic simply refers to a type of camera lens which has a wider aspect ratio than a spherical lens. What's distinctive about anamorphic lenses as well is that they can blur backgrounds, enabling things closer to the frame to stand out more. 2022's The Batman, directed by Matt Reeves, uses anamorphic lenses to create the film's distinctive neo-noir look. If you look at some of the shots I'm showing you from that movie now, notice how little of the image is actually in focus, therefore guiding the viewer's focus onto specific things in the frame, which is an excellent choice for a film like that, because utilizing this technique ensures that the audience focuses on specific clues as well as the expressions of the characters, enabling the viewer to get the most out of this film. But going back to my original point here, because anamorphic lenses can be so blurry, you can create an effect with light known as an anamorphic flare, which is one of these. So what that means is that when you shoot the practical light goggles in a certain way with these lenses, you get this effect, thus blurring the fact that these actors and extras are wearing goggles, and instead make the robots look like they're actually projecting light out of them. Real lighting is something that this film does a very good job of making the most of throughout. Even at the end, when they're all driving away from the explosion, whilst most of that is CGI, to get the car lit accurately, they had the car be chased by a lorry with a lighting rig attached to the front of it, so that orange light bounces off the car, characters and hedges in a way that's accurate, and then the rest of the effects are added in using CGI. When you combine practical and visual effects, you get the best results, because you're making the most of all the tools available to you, ensuring that neither the creative vision is limited by the technical or safety limitations, and ensuring that the effects used are made to look as realistic and believable as possible. Another element you might not give much thought to is the movement of the performers playing the robots, but an awful lot of effort was put into ensuring that the robots moved in a progressively more robotic way as the film goes on, as it becomes apparent to the characters what the situation in Newton Haven is, and also that they all sometimes move in a coordinated and synchronized style.
It was kind of easier with something like Shaun of the Dead, because it's like we all know how zombies are supposed to move, and we could try and veer a little bit from that, but there was a certain movement vocabulary that people were expecting. And in this, where it's a little bit more along the lines of body snatchers, it's much more subtle. You want it to build slowly, so at first you're like, oh yeah, it's just some people sitting in a pub, and then you're like, wait a minute, did they just drink at the same time? Oh, coincidence. And then later it's like, no, it's not a coincidence, and the eagle-eyed viewer will slowly sort of start picking up on these things, kind of with the idea that there was a group think going on.
Now this neatly leads us onto another form of movement in this film, and that's the fight sequences. According to Edgar Wright, one of the inspirations for this film was the Jackie Chan movie Drunken Master. In that film, Jackie Chan's character can only fight when he's drunk. And if you notice, the characters in this film, particularly Andy, get progressively better at fighting the robots as they get more drunk. I mentioned in my Shaun of the Dead video about how Edgar Wright's films are influenced by the Hong Kong action films of his childhood years. Even in Shaun of the Dead, as I mentioned in that video, the fight scenes utilize similar swooping noises reminiscent to those found in Jackie Chan films. And if you want to know more about that, then the link to that video will be on your screen again now. One of the goals for this film's action was to blend that Hong Kong slick style of fight sequences with the British bar fight setting, which creates a very unique and interesting combination of elements which hasn't really been done before, or since actually. To ensure this influence is clearly present, the film employed stunt coordinator Brad Allen, who worked on the Hong Kong action movie scene, even working with Jackie Chan's crew. So this choreography, combined with the film's DP, which is a director of photography, Bill Pope, really brought out the best in these fight sequences, because Bill Pope was the man who lit the Matrix sets, so he also certainly knows how to shoot action sequences from a camera perspective. Also, the majority of the fight sequences were performed by the actors themselves too, so all went through extensive fight and stunt training to prep for the fights in this film. Nick Frost in particular is commended for his work at this in multiple interviews and behind the scenes videos. What I deeply appreciate about these action sequences too is that character is never lost in the choreography. The choreography is always tailored to suit the characters. So Peter Page is always hiding for most of them, matching that character's nervousness. Andy Knightley's stature makes him excellent for being more of a brawler, therefore his style mainly focuses on throwing people around. And Gary King's obsession with drinking means that he's often trying to do so during the fight scenes. This too is a homage to Drunken Master, as this spit take is directly out of that. As all this showcases, a lot of effort was put into every detail of this film, and that's something which made Edgar Wright such a fantastic director. He's a perfectionist and a visionary, and it's said that he will do as many takes necessary to get what he needs. Also, much like in the previous two entries in the Cornetto Trilogy, there are many real-life inspirations behind characters. Sam is based on Edgar Wright's ex-girlfriend from school, and Rosamund Pike even went to meet her to help craft her character.
I'd never worked with Rosamund Pike before, and it's funny, like, we went out for dinner and she was asking me all about the character and stuff. So who's the character based on? So I told this story about a friend at school, and I went out with his younger sister at one point, and then we stopped dating. And then my friend also went out with his sister. So then and then he stopped dating her as well. So then there was this extremely awkward period where we had both been out with our best friend's sister. And Roz being super method goes, are you still in touch with her? Can I meet her? I was like, yeah, I haven't seen her for 10 years, but we're still in touch on Facebook and stuff, so I guess I could. So Roz went to meet her in her hometown, which was outside of London. I wasn't present. And in fact, I haven't seen her since either. But they apparently had a whale of a time and went out for a drink and a meal. And then Roz came back with, yeah, I got it. So I look forward to my ex-girlfriend watching the movie. I didn't know the character comes off very well, so she should be happy.
Mr. Shepherd is based off Edgar Wright's drama teacher, Mr. Wilde. And in fact, I failed to mention this in my Hot Fuzz video. But Mr. Wilde is the judge in the Village of the Year competition in that film. And the woman on the left is Leslie Wright, which is Edgar Wright's mum, and the woman on the right is Gillian Rosemary Smith, who's Simon Pegg's mum. And returning back to Mr. Shepherd, you can see the visual comparisons between Mr. Wilde and how they stylized Pierce Brosnan to look as Mr. Shepherd in this film. So in the same way as the previous two films, real-life people and events inspired this story. To end, the final detail I'll point out is that this film unifies the genres of the previous two films in the trilogy. Shaun of the Dead was a zombie film, and Hot Fuzz an action film. This movie is a cross between a zombie apocalypse, although the zombies are replaced with robots, and it's, as I've shown, undeniably an action film, much like how Hot Fuzz is. So this film is an excellent round-off to the trilogy, tying together the genres and ideas of the previous two films into a final and very original conclusion to what is a very original and genius trilogy. So with all that in mind, including the two previous films in this series, that is why to me very few films will ever top the excellence of the Cornetto Trilogy. Now if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and if you've watched all three of these videos in this particular Cornetto Trilogy series, then I thank you even more. If you're looking for more film and TV reviews and breakdowns, then please do like and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching.